City. It's part of the Cherokee Strip. It's a Kansas-Oklahoma border town. So I'm not sure how my family Bible got from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, back into Kansas, or well, got into Kansas. Um, but from what I think, I think now somebody from Coffeyville may correct me, but I was with my dad and I was in Coffeyville, and he took me out north of town and west to where I put a little blue circle and an orange blue arrow. He took me out to that spot right there, and we was driving up and down the north and south road there, and he pointed out there and he says, I'm pretty sure this is where the Delarues, well, no, it wasn't the Delarues. See, and I'm not sure. Yeah, it was a Delarue. I'm not sure. It had something to do with the Delarues, and it may have been the Delarues. But he pointed out there and he said there was a house out there. And we drove on down the road and we turned down this road and we came up to this really big house that looked like the blacksmith's house in Pawhuska. Same style, little bigger, had a cellar. Cellar had a lot of jars in it. Had a cow about 2 weeks dead in a room upstairs. Had walked up the steps. That was crazy. It was in bad shape, but it was there. And he says, I think this was one of the houses too. So he wasn't sure. Whatever. So we went from there on the west side of town to the east side of town and to the south side of town where I have another arrow and another circle, and that is where my dad said that they moved to next. And I don't know if they were Delarues or Bakers or but yeah. Anyway,
So I'm making these videos because it's a family channel. And I just kind of make videos about whatever's going on in the family. And this Bible thing has come up. It's come up before. And so every time it comes up, I get a little bit more pictures of the past, the present, and the future. Believe it or not, all three. Which is odd. So I got to put together this Bible, this family Bible. And family Bibles are passed down through the moms. Men are not supposed to have anything to do with it unless they have to. Unless we don't have a woman in the place where we would like her to be. Sometimes a man has to step in, and they're just not built for it. They're not built for, their ego is too big for them to pass down history how it happened. So anyway, So I learn as I go along, and some of it I had been told before, bits and pieces, but I didn't have the whole picture. Just got told a little story about something my dad in the past, or my mom in the past, or whatever. So my dad always told this story that he said they lived in Coffeyville. My dad, my dad didn't live in Coffeyville. My dad lived in Henrietta. And they would go visit his mom's father in Coffeyville. His mom had the Baker Bible. And this is where she met John Casey Baker and become a baker. Or I'll sort that out when the time comes. Anyway, my dad would be in Coffeyville, actually Liberty, probably. I think in Liberty. No. Yes. I'll have to straighten it out. I gotta straighten it all out to put it in this, make sure it's all in this Bible correctly. Brought up to myself being a owner of the Bible, my daughter becoming, my wife becoming an owner of the Bible, and then myself, then my daughter, my wife, my daughter. No, get the men out. My wife, owner of the Bible, my mom, my wife, my daughter, and then granddaughter. Got to get the whole picture from all the way from Sid Delarue all the way up to my granddaughters. I need that all put in there. I think I'm gonna have some pictures and stuff, some black and white pictures to put in there too. Spray fix them very good and put them in their own little section, bound on both sides with 2 pieces of paper so they don't get their images anywhere it's not supposed to be. And I put in the Bible, I'm putting little linen strips where these pictures can be added. Very thin, as minimal as I can. So anyway, my dad, this was before, right? This was before Roosevelt signed this this homestead. So this is before Jennings. This is Coffeyville. And in Coffeyville, it's just like crazy cowboy madness. You know, they talk about, well, they never stood in the street and faced each other and jawed down each other. Oh, only Bill, I don't know, Buffalo Bill, or it's one of these guys. They're the only ones that ever did it. No, they didn't stand down in the street. They just, and draw. No, they just started shooting each other like the Hatfields and McCoys. Only they rode around on horses, and they ate well. They had a lot of beef, had a lot of farms, had a lot of apple juice. So I put in some clips of the 101. A 101, the 101, a ranch in Ponca City. This all in this same neighborhood kind of stuff. I'll put a map up. So I put some clips so you could see what these crazy guys are like. So anyway, my dad would go visit I think the last time that he went and visited his grandpa, Baker. Grandpa Baker, Sylvia's dad, was a pioneer. He was a pioneer. I think he's John Casey Baker, I believe. Jennings is full of bakers too, which is where this is. This is almost Jennings. This is Keystone Lake, Tulsa, but it's a little island in Keystone Lake now. So I don't know how from there they moved to Jennings, or he moved to Jennings. But anyway, back to the 101 and Crazy Cowboys. So my dad will go visit his relatives in Liberty and Coffeyville, which Liberty's a little small town about 6 miles out of Coffeyville. And I think they were at Liberty because my dad would tell this story that the Cowboys would come by and tell the farmers to either let the cattle out or put the cattle in. So somebody would just go around, messenger, and tell them that tomorrow afternoon, put your cattle in. And if tomorrow afternoon you're going to be putting the cattle in. And that meant don't go downtown. There's going to be trouble. So I would ask Grandpa. I would ask my dad. I would ask my dad what Grandpa. I would ask my dad, what is he talking about? What kind of trouble? He says, oh, there was, people that didn't like each other on both sides. They'd argue over law. And they go in town and steal stuff. Rob banks and stuff. They go in town and rob banks. Yep, that's it. They go out and tell you put the cattle in. Don't go into town tomorrow. That meant don't go into town tomorrow. There's probably going to be shooting, and that means there's going to be trouble, and they're going to be robbing banks. Yeah, probably robbing banks. So that's just one story in Coffeyville, the robbing banks. It really only happened once. So I don't think my dad was telling me about something that happened like on a regular basis. I think he was telling me about, this is when my grandpa told me about when the Dalton brothers tried to rob 3 banks in Coffeyville and got all shot up. He used to tell me about Bellstar and Hole in the Wall gang too. I wish I had recordings of those. People, even I got a few recordings of my dad and my mom, but they're shy, and it's too bad. They're shy about talking on camera because, I'd love to have some of that on video. So I guess best I can do is leave some behind for my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids, wherever this Bible's going. All right. Well, I'm gonna just let this play out. I'll show you where I'm at trying to figure out this story, and then maybe I'll re-edit this video about 10 times and
Blossom. The graves of 5 cowboys are on this hill, but the only one with a tombstone belongs to a Negro named Bill Pickett. It stands as a monument to one of the great rodeo performers of all time. Breaking horses and roping cattle was such an everyday chore that no one gave it much thought. Bill Pickett made a game out of throwing the tough longhorns around, and he invented the sport of bulldogging, encouraging the steer to cooperate by sinking his teeth into its nose. In 1905, the Millers gave a roundup performance for a convention of the National Editorial Association. They drew the biggest crowd in territorial history, 50,000 persons. Special trains came from as far away as Kansas City and Dallas, and the railroads were so jammed it was impossible to get a train out of Ponca City for days. That was all the signal the Millers needed. They built their own roundup arena. They always preferred the word roundup to rodeo, and into their arena they paraded some of the most unusual entertainment extravaganzas ever seen. Colonel Joe Miller rode with the show on an $8,000 saddle mounted with diamonds, sapphires, and rubies, often surrounded by the surviving cowboys of the Cherokee Strip. The riders received their rewards, but the Miller brothers received even greater ones. With the roundups came a deluge of visitors, 100,000 a year, not including the roundup attendants. To the great and the near great, the doors of the White House were always open, the Miller hospitality always available. No Oklahoma building ever hosted such a wonderful assortment of visitors as did the stately White House. Admiral Richard Byrd was photographed atop an elephant. John Philip Sousa became a Ponca Indian. Mary Roberts Reinhardt came to gather background for a book. Teddy Roosevelt was delighted. The guest list read like a cross-section of who's who. Nancy Astor, John Ringling, William Randolph Hearst, Irvin Cobb, Rex Beach, William Allen White, Charles Curtis, John D. Rockefeller Jr., Warren Harding. Cartoonist Sidney Smith drew Andy Gump on a White House wall and had an oil well named after him. All came and all were enchanted by the 101. Kids were there too, orphans, Boy Scouts, underprivileged, all hoping that they might someday grow up to be cowboys for the 101. They saw the buffalo, last of the millions which once roamed the ranch. Some were there when Geronimo, the wily Apache, was brought up from imprisonment at Fort Sill to shoot his last buffalo. Aged and infirm, wearing a top hat, he stood in an automobile to fire his rifle. But the years had caught Geronimo. Though he hit the buffalo, another hunter had to finish the kill. The 101 had many roundups, but none as strange as the annual Terrapin Roundup staged by the Miller brothers. From the thousands of little land turtles on the ranch, the Millers conceived the idea of a Terrapin Derby and then built it up as only the Millers could. They sent cowboys out to bring in the terrapins by the sackful. At ranch headquarters, other men waited to number each terrapin and to enter him in the sweepstakes. On Derby Day, Oklahomans turned out by the thousands and bet on their numbered steed. The first Derby was held in 1924, and they grew every year until one editor was suggesting that the whole event be moved to the state fairgrounds. The whole event looked like a burlesque of the Kentucky Derby. and miniature steeds were paraded before post time on wagons with white-coated grooms in careful attendance. The ranch gave all its pageantry to the parade, and in this case, imported a senator to preside. The traditional racetrack was modified somewhat to fit the confused running habits of a terrapin. The race started from a large circle in the middle of the field. The fiery steeds were shoveled into baskets and transported by their handlers to the center circle. The crowd waited with something like breathless anticipation. The biggest problem was getting the steeds right side up, but then all jockeys have problems. And since every terrapin represented somebody's $2, they all had to have an equal start in the interest of good sportsmanship. They're off. Thundering across the track, the noble animals strained every muscle. Those fortunate enough to be first across the finish line, in this case the outside circle, were in the money. This time the sturdy little terrapin carried $4,500 to win. It was recorded that M.W. Gaffey of Ponca City won. Mr. Gaffey announced that he would use the windfall to pay off his mortgage and get married again. The slow death of the great 101 Ranch began with the death of Colonel Joe in 1927. They found him in the ranch garage, a victim of carbon monoxide. In his will was a $1,000 gift to the Ponca Indians to provide for the traditional memorial service. More than 1,000 Indians gathered for the rites, where the personal belongings of the deceased were distributed among his friends according to Indian custom. 2 years later, in the winter of 1929, George Miller was killed in an automobile accident while returning to the ranch. The last services for George Miller also drew a large crowd to the ranch. Crowds were expected at the 101. There had been many over the years. People had come by the thousands to watch the roundups, to thrill to the apple blossoms and to the circus. Thousands more had laughed at the improbable terrapin derby. But this was an audience for sorrow, one emotion that had always been foreign to the 101. A long line followed the casket into Ponca City. It was a bleak day for the great ranch, bleaker than the patches of winter snow which spotted the frozen ground. Two were gone now. Joe, the genial host and horticulturist, and George, the financial wizard, indispensable money manager who had always been able to pay off the big loans and get more to take their place. The two brothers who wrote such an amazing chapter in the history of their state were buried in a family plot in the Ponca City Cemetery. Zach Miller tried to carry on, but it was too late. He was hit by the Depression, crops failed, thousands of dollars in mortgages came due. Zach tried to save the ranch with the show, but he was hounded by bad weather, poor attendance, accidents, and hungry lawyers. The Miller brothers' real Wild West and Great Far East show lost $2,500 a day and finally went broke in Washington, D.C. There came a day when Zach, alone in the White House, tried to stand off his creditors with a gun. But it was no use. A judge ordered him jailed. Governor Murray dispatched the National Guard and set him free, but troops could not save the ranch. It took 4 auctioneers working all one dusty day to dismember the last of the 101. Everything went, even the buffalo. Through it all, Zach stayed in the White House, hidden from the curious crowds. And then, 2 hours before a sundown deadline, the last of the Miller brothers left the ranch. Through the 30s, the White House gradually rotted away. Finally, during World War II, it was demolished and the materials sold. Only the foundation and concrete vault survived the wrecking hammers. Zach Miller lived on, a broken, unhappy man until he died in 1949. He asked to be buried on a hill beside the Salt Fork, looking north over the heart of the 101 Ranch. And that's where he is today.